It's already started. As the Toronto Maple Leafs season is getting underway, Mitch Marner's future in Toronto is still in question, and a new report has revealed the Leafs' master plan surrounding Marner and has also revealed a couple of key Leafs targets. Stay tuned for all that in this episode, but before we get into it, quick reminder to hit the subscribe button. If you're a part of the percentage that aren't subscribed to the channel, about 70% of you, you're going to want to hit that button. It would mean the world to Darius and myself, as we're on the road to 14,000 subscribers. But Darius, a lot to go over today, and an interesting report just dropped by Nick Kypreos, and it sheds some light onto the Mitch Marner situation. And obviously, the Toronto Maple Leafs at this point have gotten off to a really hot start. They lost their first game. They've won 3 straight. They're 3-1. A huge games coming up on Saturday against the New York Rangers. But a question mark that is still plaguing Leafs fans is the Mitch Marner situation. He's gotten off to a very good start to this year. He's playing great on both ends of the ice. But his future after this year is something that is in jeopardy, and it's going to affect the Leafs greatly. And an article dropped from Nick Kypreos shedding some very interesting light on his inside information surrounding what it's looking like. So he dropped it about an hour ago. It says the Leafs are seen with 2 options as Mitch Marner enters the final season of his contract. Either find the money to extend him or treat him as a rental for one last playoff run, similar to how the Lightning handled Steven Stamkos before letting him walk in the offseason. Toronto could take a page from the Lightning's playbook, who plan to replace Stamkos' contract with free agent Jake Gensel. The Leafs might follow suit with potential free agents Mikko Rantanen, Sam Bennett, or Brad Marchand if they're still available come July 1st. And the bigger story here is kind of just Mitch Marner's future in Toronto, but it is right on brand for Nick Kypreos to talk about the offseason 4 games into the regular season. I'm not too worried as much about, what their plans are surrounding free agency yet, because again, we have this whole season to go over. But it is very interesting, especially as the trade deadline approaches this season, what the Leafs plan and what their view is with Mitch Marner. I still think there's a world he could get extended sometime through this year if the Leafs fork up the money. But if they don't, they're going to be in for a very interesting offseason. And he named a few targets here the Leafs are going to be targeting. And again, this is into next season, but it plays big dividends into this season and what matters as the deadline approaches and how the team chemistry continues to unfold surrounding Mitch Marner.
Now, I'm not sure that I can liken this to the Steven Stamkos situation like Nick Kypreos is, because I think Steven Stamkos coming into last year's training camp felt disrespected that there was no contract offer and they didn't talk during the summer. We know that that's not the case for Darren Ferris, who's Mitch Marner's agent, and Mitch Marner, and of course the Toronto Maple Leafs. We know that they've been talking, at least, right? They haven't gotten a deal done, but they've kind of been trying to get a framework together. Now, what I think is most likely going to happen this season is they're not going to sign a deal. We know that there was, a likelihood of it getting done before the season started, but I would say there's next to 0 chance that it gets done during the season. So I think it's going to wait till after the season. And now, is it actually going to get signed or not? I'm not sure. I think it really honestly depends on not just his regular season this year and how he plays defensively and all the things that we know, the physicality, all that, but the playoffs. The Leafs are expected to make the playoffs this year. Again, obviously off to a hot start this year, 3-1. And when they eventually make the playoffs, because that is the plan, how does Mitch Marner perform in them? If they don't see any steps or anything like that towards, something that you can say, okay, this was a lot better and we can actually build off this in the future, then I think that they might be okay with moving off this player and signing another player, which we'll get into, or a couple other players with that salary cap space that you're going to have from him leaving, and obviously not re-signing him because he's going to garner a raise somewhere else, or if he stays in Toronto, right? So I think that's the most likely scenario. They're going to play out the season, see how it goes, see how the playoffs go. And if there is no change, then I can see them possibly moving off of him and signing somebody else.
And again, it's an interesting time for this article to drop as the season literally just started. But it does also make some sense. You mentioned there's probably a minimal chance that Mitch Marner gets extended this season. His agent has come out publicly and said that they want, and it makes most sense for him if he's trying to get the most money possible to wait until the offseason. But it's still leaving it's a weird feeling knowing, you're seeing Mitch Marner play great so far to start the year. He's playing good on both ends of the ice. And with his future for the first time in his Maple Leafs tenure, aside from when they extended the contract, but even then, everyone knew that Dubas was going to extend Mitch Marner. And boy, did he ever, with a very friendly contract. This is the first time that it's very interesting in the sense of Marner. There's a real world he leaves after this year. And this is kind of their year to go out and really make a push. And that's why they signed guys like Tanev and OEL. But looking at some of the targets that could replace him, again, it's early to talk about it, but it's a very interesting report, and there's always a reason for timing of these reports dropping. So basically, he said here, obviously Mikko Rantanen, Sam Bennett, Brad Marchand, and those are the other options, assuming Mitch Marner does part ways in free agency or part ways at some point. I don't see the Leafs at this point trading him away at the deadline unless something bearing a disaster happening, or I guess them getting completely overwhelmed. But even then, I don't think they let Mitch Marner go, given how good he is. You can see former NHL player hints at the Maple Leafs could target one of these Stanley Cup champions. So it's super interesting here. And Brad Marchand is the biggest name in the sense of name value and shock value for a lot of us Leafs fans. Seems the most unlikely to be interesting if Toronto took a shot at signing Brad Marchand. He's been a thorn in the side of the Leafs and their fans for many years, obviously a Boston Bruin. Similar to Rantanen, a lead offensive player with grit, not known for being the biggest player in the game, but he has heart. And this is an interesting thing to discuss because obviously the whole center of the offseason was Mitch Marner's trade, his replacement. I think that if they do decide, if Mitch Marner does end up leaving, whether or not they make a deep playoff run, there are a lot of options out there that they can replace him with, and I don't think you don't need to be too worried if that happens with the salary that's coming off the books. That being said, I've been very impressed with Mitch Marner so far throughout this brief regular season.
There's a lot of options that they can replace him with technically, but I don't know if there's a lot of Mitch Marner replacements, if that makes sense out there. Like when you look at the three players that were listed here by Kyprios, all three of them have won a Stanley Cup. They know what it takes to win. And I think that's very valuable. And the Leafs could use all three players. But when you look at the list, Mikko Rantanen to me is the only guy who would be a Mitch Marner replacement who can come in and put up the same amount of points and have the same impact across both sides of the ice and everything like that, right? But Sam Bennett, he's not a Mitch Marner replacement. He would be a great piece and can probably help you win a Stanley Cup. Same with Brad Marchand. But the thing with Brad Marchand too is that's crazy if he becomes a Toronto Maple Leaf, first of all, because of everything that's happened with the Boston Bruins. And he's really old. Like he's coming up on the last couple seasons of his career. I say really old, but for a hockey player, obviously. He's coming on to the last couple of years of his career, and the Leafs Cup window would shrink, I think, even more so than it already is with them signing a couple older guys, like you mentioned, Tanev and OEL this season. They're really going for it in the next 2 to 3 seasons. So, and signing a guy like Brad Marchand, you're getting a little bit older, but, Mikko Rantanen would be a great replacement for him if he wanted to come to Toronto, because, again, there's no extension there in place yet with Colorado, and that's pretty interesting as well. But yeah, a couple options there who could, replace him, at least his spot. But I don't know if there's anybody other than Rantanen who can, put up as many points or have that big of an impact as Mitch Marner's having.
Yeah, and there's not going to be, like you mentioned, replacing Mitch Marner 1-for-1. He is a very unique player. But if his time in Toronto is coming to an end this year, I guess it's their time to, I don't want to say appreciate him necessarily, because I think most Leafs fans have done that to a degree in various ways. But I think it's going to be interesting to see, especially after the deadline, assuming he stays a Toronto Maple Leaf and no contract extension gets done, what the outlook is looking like as the playoffs approach, assuming, don't want to jump the gun, but assuming the Leafs do make the playoffs, and assuming, even let's just say Mitch Marner has a great regular season, what Brad Treliving decides to do when it comes to finding the money to extend him. Because they have the money, they can do that, MLSC, all these things, the cap, they can make it work. But will they want to fork out $13 million to Mitch Marner if the same thing happens again? That being said, all of that could be washed away if Craig Berube finds a way to unlock Mitch Marner like he's done to a degree so far this season. He's unlocked a lot of the guys, and the play style looks different. So I don't want to jump the gun on talking about Mitch Marner heading out, because I kind of want to just appreciate this season so far and what we have for it. But this is not the last time we're going to be talking about Mitch Marner getting moved, whether it's before the deadline, after the deadline, because it is the biggest storyline during the season, alongside, of course, the actual games. It's the biggest storyline for implications on the Toronto Maple Leafs over the next half decade, because he's not going anywhere and he's entering his prime right now. So any final thoughts?
It's the biggest transactional piece of news that the Leafs are going to be dealing with this entire season. It just is. And I don't think it gets done during the season. And I don't want to compare it completely to Kawhi Leonard, right? Because different circumstances, it's not going to be a trade. It's going to be through free agency. They're probably swapping players, if anything, if that happens, right? But this could be a moment for the Leafs to really, say, we're not going to sign anything till the season ends. We want to see how you do in the playoffs. And if nothing's changed, we have to make some changes, right? Because I think at the end, they have an opportunity here, because they didn't last year, last offseason with the no trade clause or the no move clause. So they have an opportunity here to be like, listen, nothing has changed. We got to change something, because we have to try and win a Stanley Cup here while Austin Matthews, William Nylander, who's already locked up, right? While these guys are here, we have to try to win the Stanley Cup. So it's going to be an interesting summer coming up. And I'm surprised that this came up already 4 games into the season.
Yeah, and there's very early for those things to come up. But the Leafs are rolling. Mitch Marner's playing well, and we'll keep you up to date with all the latest news on that, as well as, of course, the games that they don't play until Saturday, another couple-day break, but they're preparing for a very important game against New York Rangers on Saturday. So make sure to hit the subscribe button, and we'll see you guys in tomorrow's video.